We had sold 100 million records during this time, and we're playing everywhere.
Tommy James and the Shondells were big in the late 60s and early 70s. They had more than a dozen top 40 hits, but Tommy's personal life was on a downward spiral.
I was addicted to amphetamines, and I was functioning but barely.
Tommy James is our guest on this episode of GPS, God, People, Stories. I'm Jim Kirkland.
And I'm Phil Fleischman. Tommy hit on a lot of different subjects in our interview, from UFOs, yes, UFOs, to the mob, to Billy Graham. But Jim, there was one theme that really stood out.
Really is, and he's quick to tell you. It's this theme right here. God doesn't let you go.
GPS. God, People, Stories.
Tommy James was born in Dayton, Ohio in 1947, but his family moved and he was raised in the town of Niles, Michigan.
Brought up Catholic in the Midwest, and have actually been very grateful to my folks and parochial schools and the nuns and the teachers I had early in life, because they introduced me to the Lord.
But Tommy was more interested in pursuing his music career than he was a relationship with God. And by the time he graduated from high school, he'd already enjoyed some commercial success. So off he headed to New York City.
And I was very much, believe it or not, into UFOs at the time. Wanted to know about flying saucers. And so I'm out on the road in late 1966. And we had all taken some kind of pill to stay up all night. And I am literally in my hotel room by myself. And all of a sudden, I see a Gideon Bible. And I didn't know really where to start reading. I just kind of thumbed through it and ended up in Ezekiel. And you talk about the good Lord meeting you right where you are. All of a sudden in Ezekiel, I start reading about the greatest UFO story in history.
Ezekiel was a prophet in ancient Israel, and God gave him some pretty spectacular visions. Here's an example of what he wrote about some creatures he saw in a windstorm. It's from the first chapter of Ezekiel. This is what it says. Fire moved back and forth among the creatures. It was bright, and lightning flashed out of it. The creatures sped back and forth like flashes of lightning.
And all of a sudden, I can't put it down. I'm reading and reading and reading. Well, I did a terrible thing. I stole the Bible, put it in my suitcase, and took it home with me. It took me years to figure out that that's what you're supposed to do. I didn't realize it. So I was feeling very guilty for a lot of years. So I took it back home. I started reading as much as I could, the Old Testament, the New Testament.
Not too long after that, Billy Graham held a crusade in New York City.
So Channel 9, that you usually get the Mets games on, we're broadcasting the Billy Graham crusade every night instead of the ball game from Shea Stadium. And so I'm watching, and I watched every single night. And by the third night, I gave my heart to the Lord in a very real way. I got right down in front of the television when the invitation came, and I'm sure I did retinal damage getting so close to the TV and putting my nose right up to the screen and my hand on.
The Shondells were enjoying huge commercial success.
Well, at that moment, we had just had 5 million selling records in a row.
The path that leads to that kind of success can be filled with a lot of dangerous potholes, but its allure is very strong. And Tommy chose to follow that path instead of following Christ.
Well, basically, during the 1960s, I was addicted to amphetamines, and I was, a real basket case by the end of the 60s, and I was functioning but barely, and also I was drinking. So it really, all through the 70s and into the 80s, I was drinking and taking Valium. We had sold 100 million records during this time. And, we're playing everywhere, but as I said, I was functioning on about 2 or 3 cylinders, and I really was not living the Christian life that I knew I should have been.
But in 1986, that began to change. Tommy went to the Betty Ford Center and got completely clean.
I had a real revelation at the Ford Center. I opened my Bible sort of like I had done back in the beginning, sort of thumb through it and just ask God to speak to me wherever the page ended up. I would read that page and I knew God would talk to me through that page, and he did, and my eyes fell on Psalm 32. And I'm paraphrasing, but it basically is a conversation between David and God, and first David is speaking, and then God is speaking, and essentially it says, "Don't make me treat you like a wild donkey." You know, and it just really went right to my heart, and I knew God was speaking to me through that, and it changed my life in a very real way. Once I was out of the center, thank God, I never relapsed, and I really began. I was basically reprogrammed at that point by the Lord.
And Tommy came to understand a truth about God that he's still quick to share with people. And that is this: God never leaves you.
Once you're His forever. And you can't be badder than He is good. I guess that's a good way of putting it. That was everything to me, because it was absolutely the truth. And He always let me know it was Him, too. He just didn't let go of me. And finally, when I did, come to my senses and do it the right way, He was right there with me. And so it's been a very personal thing between myself and Jesus, and it's been a very pragmatic, very street level, very personal.
Tommy's story is a lot like the Bible story of the prodigal son. And God was using Tommy even when he was off living the wild life.
Even back when I was still popping pills back in the 60s and drinking, and I was writing songs like Crystal Blue Persuasion would come out, and everybody could read into that, even though I was a baby.
Persuasion reached number 2 on the charts in 1969. The inspiration for the song comes from the book of Revelation.
Where the lake of
And was persuaded by the truth of Christ, they all became Christians.
Tommy's still touring today, and Crystal Blue Persuasion is one of the band's hits that he performs, as is Sweet Cherry Wine, which is a song about the blood of Christ.
I say at the end of Sweet Cherry Wine on stage, I say, keep looking up, Jesus is coming. And, I don't get preachy, I just say that little thing, and all of it, you wouldn't believe how many people hear that and come up to me after the show and talk about Jesus.
That's neat, yeah.
It's quite remarkable.
Yeah.
It really is, and I get to talk about all of this with people and have conversations with real people.
There is a song that Tommy doesn't perform as part of his show, but it is one that is very special to him.
That every time I hear that song, Just As I Am, from the Billy Graham Crusades, I feel like I'm home again. I love that song. It reminds me of when I was saved.
God received Tommy James just as he was, and He'll receive you just as you are. You don't need to clean yourself up before you bring yourself to Jesus. Let Him take your life just